one of the Movie Buff Specialists. I wanted to just call it the Movie Buffs, but then I figured I had to throw a specialist in there because why not? We are the specialist channel after all. I am Phil. That is John. If you're not familiar with us, we've been doing a challenge podcast on every Wednesday night. Alexa, not really the type for this type of movie thing, but John and I, once we started talking about it, we we're like, we just have to do this. We have to give it a try, and hopefully we can bring our joy of movies to you all. So the way this is going to work, it's going to be a process. It is going to be a journey. We're going to see how it actually plays out. But right now, John and I have a list of our top 100 movies, our favorite 100 movies of all time. Not necessarily what we think are the best 100 movies. Don't get me wrong. I understand The World's End is not maybe one of the 100 best cinematic movies ever made. But we're going to be breaking it down from our number 100 to our number one on both of our lists. We're going to be doing 2 movies a week. We might start doing more if we start to really like this, start really going into it and getting maybe 2 episodes a week or something along those lines. But every episode of this series will be based on our number whatever movie. That means today we're starting at number 100. 100 episodes from now, you'll be seeing number 1. So there you go. That's the entire thing right there. John, welcome. Glad to have you on here. How you feeling right now?
I am feeling fantastic, Phil. We are here and we are talking movies, a general passion of mine. Ever since I was a kid, movies have always played a big part of my life. My family were going to movies all the time, almost every week growing up. And that continued until I moved away from a place with a movie theater. And then once I got back, I started hitting up the movies again. I've studied film in university some. So I'm really excited to be talking about this stuff now.
And what I like about doing a top 100 is that at least one of us is going to really love every movie that we're going to talk about. I feel like a lot of movie podcasts, movie type anything, movie conversation just in general, there's always some negativity involved. And there might be some negativity in here if I just totally disagree with one of John's choices or if he disagrees with one of mine. But ultimately, this is about a love of movies. So if you love movies, this is the place to be right now. I also was a film major in college. I worked in the film industry. This is something that I love. And working in the film industry, I realized a lot of people just don't like movies. They like to complain about the movie being made and think that whatever they haven't had produced was better than what they just watched on screen. It's a very frustrating industry. It's not very fun. But all of that being said, how can you not love movies? And if you're a big movie fan, we have quite a wide variety here. And I think that is greatly expressed right off the bat in our first episode, which is going to be Les Miserables and The Descendants, 2 completely different movies. And I think that that is what's going to be so much fun about this list, is that we're going to be talking about a lot of movies that might have nothing in common. And it's why movies are so much fun and why really doing a ranking is so damn arbitrary, because the 100th best movie, Les Mis for John, The Descendants for me. What differentiated it from my number 99? Ultimately, I just clicked the button. That's really what it came down to. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Les Mis and The Descendants. John, if I'm not mistaken, this was your first time watching The Descendants, correct?
That is correct. I watched it for the first time. And when you watch a movie like that, when George Clooney comes onto your screen, you're just like, oh yeah, it's George Clooney. He was on ER for a while. He had that bat nipple thing. He's okay. And then you watch him perform, and you're like, oh yeah, George Clooney's a really good actor, and he brings it in this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a movie I was telling John before we went live. I watched about 4 times in theaters, I do believe, and I've seen it probably about 10 in my entire life. Les Mis, this is the first time I'd seen it since theaters. John, how many times have you seen Les Mis?
Well, I saw it twice on the same day on opening night.
Love it.
So I went, this movie released on Christmas 2012. I went first thing in the morning to the theaters, and then I went again that night. And it's not a short movie. So I spent 5 hours of my Christmas that year watching this. Les Mis is my all-time favorite musical. I've seen 4 different stage productions of it. Some of those productions I saw multiple times while they were running. It just holds so much for me because this musical just brings me to tears. I started watching this movie this week, and as soon as that first chord struck, I was already crying just because of how, like, the emotion that it brings out in me.
I really liked Les Mis, and I saw this once in theaters, and I hadn't ever seen it since, and that's why, again, I'm really glad we're doing this kind of thing, because it's making me go back and watch some movies that I've kind of forgotten about. These movies only came out a year apart, and they could not be any further apart in terms of how they were made. I think we start with Les Mis, we talk Les Mis, then we come in with The Descendants. Although Les Mis is probably the more popular, so what do I know? I should probably go on Les Mis second, The Descendants first, but that's all right. Anybody here is just for the Les Mis half. Let's start with Les Mis, which is John's number 100 film, directed by Tom Hooper, came out Christmas Day 2012, as John just said. John, take us through the number 100 ranking of Les Mis.
So when we're ranking these 100 movies, I mean, a ranking is so particular to each individual person. We're going to go through this list. Some of my movies are very, very artsy, way out there, and I'm looking at things like cinematography. I'm looking at things like interaction between actors and stuff like that. And Les Mis has some of that stuff, but in the end, Les Mis makes my list simply because it's Les Mis. It's based off the 1985 musical, and this is a musical that I have known since I was a very young kid. We had the soundtrack growing up in my house, and when I hit high school, I started doing musical theater a lot, so I started looking into musicals a lot, and Les Mis has always struck me as my absolute favorite. It has incredible music that's incredibly catchy, and it hits you in all the right spots. There's so much emotion in this story, despite the fact that this story sometimes is a little ridiculous, especially when we're talking about the fact that Cosette and Marius fall in love over the course of 5 minutes. But it doesn't matter, because it just hits you emotionally. And that's one of the best things about movies, is a movie should invoke some sort of emotion in the viewer. That emotion could be happiness, it could be sadness, it could be lethargy, anger, but as long as it's evoking some sort of emotion, that's what it is. That's what makes a movie so special, because it's art, and it can be interpreted any way by anyone.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that gets missed a lot. I mean, look, I feel like movies always end up being this thing of, oh, you liked that, you're dumb, or oh, you hated that, you don't get it. You know what I mean? And I feel like Les Mis, when it came out, man, Les Mis took a beating. It got nominated for a whole bunch of Oscars. It won 3 of them, but it took a beating. Won the singing of all the lines. People thought that was weird. It was an adjustment. People hated that Russell Crowe was Javert. They thought that, it was too built around Anne Hathaway coming into the movie, and how much of the movie is Anne Hathaway really in. And this is a great time to say this, because I want to say this before we move on. This podcast will be loaded with spoilers. How can I talk about The Usual Suspects if I don't talk about the end? So this podcast, this whole series is going to be loaded with spoilers. That is something I need to say right away. So if you're not familiar with the movies, or if you want to watch them first on your own and then come back, go do that. But this will be loaded with spoilers. We're going to be having like a pretty open discussion. I feel like that's an important thing to say off the top, because we want to talk about the moments that we love. And sometimes that's the ending, and sometimes that's what Rosebud actually is, which, don't worry, neither one of us has Citizen Kane, so everybody can get mad. But Jordan Alford's bringing up a great point here. Most hardcore theater people hate Les Mis. Now, this was coming off the heels. This was 2 years later, but it was coming off the heels of Black Swan. And so you had Black Swan, followed by The Artist, followed by this. Now, I know that they all didn't win Best Picture, but there's a reason for this. The Artist was a silent movie that everybody was mad was a silent movie that won Best Picture. Oh, it was gimmicky. It shouldn't have won, blah, 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 all that. Black Swan the year before was Natalie Portman didn't deserve her Oscar because she didn't do half of the dancing. Not to be offensive in any way, not to be an ass, but if the girl who did the ballerina parts was a good actress, she would have an Academy Award for Black Swan. And that's kind of how I felt in this one, which is theater people really hated the casting. Oh, you just wanted to get the A-list big name. Russell Crowe can't sing. He's Gladiator. He's Maximus. Like, he's an action star. That's what he is. Why are we doing this? Why are we pretending that he's a singer? And I think that just kind of misses the point of what the movie is. The movie is a movie. The movie is not a stage play. And I think that just kind of gets lost on some people sometimes. And personally, I thought Russell Crowe was great. And I thought it was great that the villain's voice is the worst out of the bunch. Now, I know in the stage play, Javert is normally the best singer out there. But I'm just saying, I like the decision here. I think it works for the movie, which is a different entity. Same thing as comparing a book to the movie, which we'll be talking about with The Descendants. But all that being said, I really liked it, but it came under a lot of fire when it first came out. And I was really surprised to see it get nominated for as many Oscars as it did ultimately, because if you look this up, Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, any of those, ratings are not very high on this.
No, it's a very middling film for most parts. And I think part of that does come from the history of its Les Mis. Like, where 37 years removed from the premiere, this musical's been around for a long time. A lot of people know this musical really well, and they have really high expectations for it. Not to mention, this is Tom Hooper's first movie since he won the Academy Award for Best Picture with The King's Speech. So, yeah, expectations are going really high for this. And, yeah, people gripe about the cast for this movie, but the cast for this movie is incredible. There are a couple things. Yeah. Is Russell Crowe not the greatest singer? No. His singing is very inconsistent throughout the film. And I don't know why you don't just retake that to change that, because there are some times where Russell Crowe kills it as Javert. Mm-hmm. And he has the presence of Javert. He feels like Javert still. Yeah, he kind of butchers stars. It's incredibly throaty. And it's just like, oh, this is weird. And it's already weird because it's also not in the normal place it is in the musical. Mm-hmm. But Hugh Jackman has a history of musical theater. He got his start in musical theater. And Hathaway has done musical theater a ton. Amanda Seyfried is incredibly underrated and does musicals all the time too. So, like, these are people who have done these roles, these types of roles. They've done musicals before. They can sing. There's a reason they were cast in this. And just because you don't like the way that Russell Crowe's interpretation of something is, doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's different than what you were expecting. And I think that's what really got people with this.
And I think again, this is when the timing of people were starting to get iPhones, smartphones in some sense all over. So Twitter was starting to build up. I think Facebook was kind of like at its apex around this time. I could be wrong. I'm not a historian of that. But Tom Hooper winning for The King's Speech pissed off a lot of people. He didn't deserve to win for The King's Speech. In fact, like, The King's Speech is a very average movie at best. Like, in my opinion, there's nothing there. I don't care. Oh, but it's great actors doing great stuff. Okay. What the Coens did with Haley Steinfeld that same year is so much better than what anything in The King's Speech is. We'll be talking a lot about Colin Firth. I have A Single Man on my list. It's way up there. We'll be talking a lot about how Colin Firth got totally robbed for that just a week later. This was also the same year that Catherine Bigelow comes out with Zero Dark 30. And people are mad about that movie because it doesn't portray how America truly is. And I was like, okay, whatever, guys. But they didn't like that. And Catherine Bigelow was coming off The Hurt Locker just a few years earlier, winning Best Director, winning Best Picture, beating Avatar, which pissed off a lot of people. So all of that being said, I think that was still on people's minds coming into this movie of, we don't really like Tom Hooper. Tom Hooper stole an Oscar. He doesn't get nominated for this, which I think is crazy because his direction in this movie is really incredible. Say what you want about the movie, but the way he orchestrates these scenes, unbelievable. It's a beautiful movie to look at, even if you don't necessarily like the music, if you don't necessarily like what they did, the artistic decisions that were made. Just look at the way he films this movie. It's beautiful. And so what if A-list actors are loaded throughout this entire thing? Eddie Redmayne wasn't a star yet. Amanda Seyfried wasn't a star yet. Like, they were coming up onto the scene. Yes, Helena Bonham Carter and Sacha Baron Cohen are thrown in there because they're thrown in there. But it's not like egregious casting. I think everything in this movie, I think it just really, really works. Yeah,
I absolutely agree. And there are moments in this movie where it's absolutely gorgeous. You're looking at the scenery during Lovely Ladies and during I Dreamed a Dream, where they're on the coast there and they're all those broken down ships. It's gorgeous. Like, the set design in this movie is gorgeous. The shots are incredible, because what Tom Hooper does do is he focuses a lot more on the individual, which is something we don't get very much in a stage adaptation of a musical, because there's a person on a very large stage. Yes, lighting's done to focus on them, but we're not getting those visual close-ups. So we get those visual close-ups of Hugh Jackman during the prologue when after he's met the bishop and he's singing, and we see the emotion in his face. We see Anne Hathaway completely falling apart while she sings I Dream a Dream. And those are things you don't get on stage. Mm-hmm. And there are kind of some downsides to that as well. One Day More is one of the most powerful songs for a musical ever. And I feel like in this movie, it kind of loses a lot of that power because we're going through those constant cuts to all the different characters. Whereas on stage, they're just popping up on stage and they're all there together. So it's just like those little things.
I was going to say something here on One Day More, though, because again, I've never seen a stage play of Les Mis. I never have. And I mean, I've seen stage plays of other things, but never that. I thought One Day More absolutely kills it. Now, granted, I've never seen a stage play, so I don't have any type of connection with it. But when I'm watching that scene, it is the dream of every writer. Whether you write small movies that are Alexander Payne-like, which we'll talk about shortly, or massive, Stanley Kubrick in the late 60s movies that, where you're trying to just make this masterpiece. If you're making a Christopher Nolan, if you're making anything like that, the goal of every writer is to create a montage that is so powerful that it is eliciting emotion from every single character you're jumping to. A movie we'll talk about further down the line is Crash, which I know a lot of people hate, but that's fine with me because I love it. It's one of my all-time favorites. But there's scenes in that where you're like, how are they pulling this off? Magnolia, like when they're able to really jump from character to character. And in One Day More, I'm like, great. I know where every character is now. They're all at the height of their caring. And their passion is coming through, and I think that song just absolutely kills it. I mean, it's stuck in my head long after that scene is over, and honestly, I actually think that it hurts the next scene that there is actually an intermission like there would be in the show, because it's a little bit of a letdown right after that. That's how powerful I think that scene is. So I think it does help maybe that I never watched the stage play.
Oh, but I absolutely agree as well. I find that One Day More it is so powerful. And the fact that it ends the first act of the stage play is huge, because you end with that One Day More, and then it's curtains down. Here's 15 minutes. Digest what you just saw. Mm-hmm. And the other big thing with the stage play is the next song to follow One Day More is not Do You Hear the People Sing? Go ahead. Do You Hear the People Sing happens beforehand. It happens right after Red and Black.
Okay.
And I understand why they moved it here. It makes more sense how they used it in the movie, where they put it, as like this rallying cry to start the build of the barricade and everything like that. But it's supposed to be this more intimate song right after Red and Black, where Enjolras is riling up the people and the students so that they get into that feel for revolution. Mm-hmm. And I think and like you said, it takes away the impact of Do You Hear the People Sing by having it follow right after One Day More.
I do agree. Yeah, see, I didn't know that. So to me, it does feel like that's the one part of this movie where I'm like, ugh. And I remember the first time I saw this. So I saw this in theaters, didn't see it again. And when I saw it in theaters, so much was built up of Anne Hathaway in this, and I Dreamed a Dream, and this was kind of close to the Susan Boyle thing, so like everything was kind of around that song. And so I remember when that song happened super early in the movie, I was like, what? When did that, what do you mean? And then Anne Hathaway dies, spoiler, like I said, there will be spoilers, but Anne Hathaway dies, and I'm like, where is she? She's got to come back. And I felt like there was something missing there. Now I watch it this second time, I know that she's not coming back, I watch. No problem. I think the whole thing is fantastic. Hugh Jackman is phenomenal. Russell Crowe is phenomenal. Anne Hathaway's phenomenal. They're all great. Everybody's great in this movie. But that part right after One Day More still bothers me because it feels like a showstopper. And it's followed by something that doesn't feel like a showstopper, though, as I'm reading from Gamer Girl here, Do You Hear the People Sing is the best song. You're talking about how it's so big and it riles everybody up. Not knowing any of that, I'm like, it's just there, and it feels almost a little out of place, and it feels like a jarring change of like, oh, okay, now we've jumped ahead, and now we're here, and I just feel like it's a lot.
And like I said, it is just out of place because we're just supposed to get right to the barricade after that. Because one of the things with the stage play, obviously, we can't show them building a barricade in the middle of a stage play. And one thing Les Mis really does is Les Mis is always performed on a turnstile with the barricade in the middle as your main set prop for the second act. And because of that, that part didn't translate well into the movie, right? Because that's what we have. In the second act, we're focused completely on the barricade.
Mm-hmm.
And it being that turnstile helps you see both sides of everything. And so after One Day More, we open up the second act, and we're leading into things like Little People and songs like that, and we get that emotional impact in the second act.
That's interesting. Yeah, I would have never known that. That's really cool that they do it on the turnstile like that, because I mean, the whole second act does revolve around that barricade, and they have a couple things where, you know, they're trying to move around. Obviously, Javert's suicide is elsewhere, but for the most part, it's, you know, it's based around that barricade. One character that I always question, and I honestly don't understand what they say her name is, so I'm not going to say it, and I'll leave it to you. The daughter of the innkeepers.
Eponine. Oh,
what is it?
Eponine.
Eponine. Okay. Yeah. I remember the first time I watched, so confused as to what the point of her was in this movie. Now, the second time, I do understand a lot more, and I like it and all of that. Does this do you feel that the second half of this movie, and obviously it's your top 100, so probably not, but do you feel that the second half of this movie gets too crowded? And it's too much too fast? Because I felt like there should have been more of a build up with her, but I guess in the stage play there wasn't either.
No, it aside from a couple of songs reshuffling and the odd lyric change, specifically like in Work Song, when there's that really awkward part where Russell Crowe's explaining the papers to Valjean. That's not how that line goes. I think it was just being like, oh, people aren't going to understand what we say when you get your yellow papers of leave. So we have to explain it here now. And it's really weird and awkward and jarring. And I totally forgot about it until I watched it again this week. And I was like, oh, yeah, they do that a couple of times. But other than that, it's a pretty faithful adaptation. Other than the couple of songs that are moved around and the one song that's only in the movie.
Which lost, by the way, it lost the Oscar for Best Song.
Yeah.
It lost to Skyfall.
Yeah, well, yeah, but Suddenly is so impactful for the growth of Valjean, which is something we don't get in the stage play, because we cut right from the Thénardier Waltz and him getting Cosette, and then it cuts. That's where the time jump happens, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, having Suddenly there. It really does build a lot for the character of Valjean. But when it comes to Eponine has stolen my heart from a very young age. I love Eponine. I hear the opening chord for A Little Fall of Rain, and I burst into tears. I can't help myself. It just happens every single time. And what it really comes down to is, no, we're not really built up to Eponine, but that's because the characters in Les Mis are the focal point. It's not about the plot. It's not about the setting as much. Yes, those are massive parts of it, but it's really about the characters, specifically how the characters are foils of each other. Because we have our hero, Valjean, this incredibly righteous man who's a criminal and been enslaved for 19 years because he's a criminal, but he's a very righteous man. And we have the villain in Javert, who is also an incredibly righteous man. He's not a bad guy. He is a very good guy trying to do his job. And that's why we get into his suicide at the end, is because he cannot stand the thought that he was wrong. about Valjean, because he's now realized that Valjean is this righteous man doing the right thing, and he's not the criminal that he's believed he's been for the last 30 odd years. And then with Eponine, Eponine's our foil to Cosette.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important to keep in mind with Eponine, when we first see her earlier in the play as a child, and the fact that her and Cosette have swapped lives when we get into this later part. So I think that's really where it comes to Eponine. Yeah, she's not really present. She has a couple of incredible songs.
Yeah, absolutely.
On My Own, Little Fall of Rain, some of the top tier songs in this musical. Samantha Barks. I'm so glad they just decided, yeah, we're just going to take Eponine from the London production. Because that makes most sense here. We don't need to find someone else. She is the perfect Eponine. And she is. And you can tell watching the play and watching the movie, listening to her, she nails it the entire time. And you're like, yeah, you're Eponine. We get it. And she's just the emotion she brings in her two songs really get me every single time.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I totally get it. I mean, she's phenomenal. All of that. I love the songs. It's just, to me, like, as somebody who hasn't seen the play and everything, and again, I'll probably watch this again and be like, no, it doesn't bother me. It just starts to feel like, oh my gosh, there's so many characters. Where did everybody come from? But it all obviously adds up, and then it starts to dissipate a little bit. It's when they're trying to do all the guys and the students, and then you're trying to do Valjean and Javert still, and then you're trying to do what's going. But I like what you said about them all being righteous, because I think that's what's so good when a movie can have, or a play or a book can have 10 characters, and we know every single one of their motivations, and none are necessarily a villain, but they still have villainous qualities, or they still, like, they're complex characters. That's what I love. That's what I am so into. That's why you'll see, like, there's a lot of mosaics kind of on my list. There's a lot of those movies, Boogie Night, like a lot of the PTA movies, where it bounces around to a lot of different people, because I'm always fascinated. Like, yes, I love the hero's journey. I mean, everybody loves the hero's journey. That's why the hero's journey is what the hero's journey is. But I love the fact that, like, yes, when Javert is doing, like, when he's singing that song at the end, you're like, this guy has given everything he possibly could. He has given everything he possibly could, and yet look like he can't go on any longer. When Anne Hathaway is, talking about how, she thought her life would be so much different than what it is. You feel for that, and she's in 5 minutes of the movie. When Hugh Jackman is singing what he's singing about stealing the bread and all of that, and how he's going to go do right, and you get it. You just absolutely get it. And I think that is something that does really work in this movie. Even though, it starts to get a little crowded there at the end, you still realize, like, your focal point is Cosette. It is Eddie Redmayne's character, which what is it, Marius?
Marius, yeah.
Marius. It's still them. It's still Valjean, and it's still Javert. Like, that is still what you're mainly focusing on. And I personally think the Innkeepers are hilarious. I think that they're super entertaining. I think that Sacha Baron Cohen and Helena Bonham Carter are both, like, very good looking people who can also just skeeve you out in the best possible way. And so, like, I buy it. Like, I buy, if Helena Bonham Carter did not become a top tier actress of all time, she probably would have ended up in she could have fit that style of just being like, you know what, I'm going to be the disgusting innkeeper who puts, I love when they're stuffing the fake leg into the meat grinder. That's one of my favorites. But yeah, I really do think that this really, really, really works in terms of the ensemble. Just a little brief part. Now, I do want to say this though. So we both have our top hundreds on Letterboxd. That's where we both put them, 100 to 1. I love Letterboxd. The one thing that Letterboxd does, though, that I don't like is that they make you rank on a 1 to 5 scale. Everybody knows movies go to a 4. That's what they are. Movies are 1 to 4 stars. That if you say a 4-star movie, a 5-star movie doesn't exist, because 5 stars isn't what the rating system is for movies. However, what I decided to do was I would do 5 stars for my top 100, 4 stars for great movies, and kind of like a normal tier from 4 to 1, and then I would do 4.5 for movies that could possibly be in my top 100 at some point. like on like an updated version. If I'm looking, 5 years from now, I go back and I rewatch, and I did a top 100 in 2010. I did a top 100 in like 2016. I like to do this because it also lets you see, like, in your own mind, where have you grown, where have you not, all that. I will say I ultimately did give Les Mis 4.5 stars because the emotion that I felt while watching this, if I watch this movie one more time in the next year and feel that exact same emotion again, to me, it's top 100 movie, because that's what I really base it on. I don't go for, oh, well, it was artistic. Like, yes, there's some movies that are very aesthetically pleasing. I still think a movie needs to be aesthetically pleasing, but I don't just go for, it was so before its time, or, oh, it did this, or it did that. I need to have an emotional attachment where it makes me think in some way, and it sticks with me after it's over. That movie sticks with you after it's over. And I don't think there's any denying that. And that's why I kind of get surprised when there's so much panning of this movie. Yes, it's an Oscar nominated movie across the board. It made millions and millions of dollars, but there's still kind of a panning of this movie, which I always think is incredibly unfair and a little short-sighted on the critics of the time.
And I also think it's a movie a lot of people haven't revisited since it came out. To be fair, very sad movie. I understand. You kind of have to be in the mood to watch this movie. Not everyone is as obsessed with Les Mis as I am. My dream theater role is Javert. That's why this movie is in my top 100, because I love Les Mis so much. And I still think this movie does it justice. It still feels so good because it still elicits all of that emotion in you.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. Now, I want to throw some random things at you here while we jump through. It's not on your list, so I assume I know what you mean. Argo. I'm going through Oscar stuff here now because I can't help myself. Argo defeats Les Mis for Best Picture. How you feeling?
I mean, 2012 had better movies than Argo and Les Mis, but Argo didn't tell a very accurate story, so really downplayed My Nation's involvement in that situation.
Well, it's an American movie.
Yeah,
sorry, John.
It's still good, but
yeah,
Les Mis is something. I don't think it's fair for me to judge just because of my emotional connection to Les Mis.
Got it. Okay, got it. Jordan Alford says Argo is better in his opinion. I think Argo is a very underrated movie. I don't think it's top 100 material, but I have to revisit that one because it's another one I haven't really revisited. Here's the big one for me, though, and this will determine how the rest of this series is going to go. Daniel Day-Lewis over Hugh Jackman. How do you feel about Daniel Day-Lewis winning the Oscar for Lincoln?
It almost kind of felt like it was just like, oh, it's Daniel Day-Lewis. We have to give him this Oscar because he's Daniel Day-Lewis, and he always has this killer performance. We're going to talk about Daniel Day-Lewis's killer performance in 99 episodes from now. And Lincoln was not his best work, and Hugh Jackman was so good as Valjean. He's just someone who's born to play Valjean. So it was fantastic to see him cast in this, and it was fantastic to see the final work of it all, and being able to see everything from his portrayal from the very beginning of this movie to the very end, watching him go from this criminal who thinks he has no other choice, and then becoming this incredibly righteous man, and the way he reacts to finding out that he's essentially the reason Fontaine's dying, and everything in the emotion that Hugh Jackman puts in this is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I really couldn't, and that's why I threw that out there. Lincoln to me is, I do not like Lincoln. I'm not a fan really of Spielberg's work between like 2008 to 2000 and whatever now. Like War Horse, Lincoln, War Horse to me is one of the most corny movies ever made. And then when Lincoln, I thought Daniel Day-Lewis was just like, yeah, I've seen the Hall of Presidents at Disney World. Now I'm going to act. Granted, he's Daniel Day-Lewis. He's an amazing actor. I think Phantom Thread is also a great performance from him. But when you look at this year, Bradley Cooper for Silver Linings Playbook, you had Jamie Foxx for Django Unchained, who doesn't even get a nomination here. Zero Dark 30 is mainly Jessica Chastain, so you would have gone more of supporting actor there. But it was Joaquin Phoenix for The Master. That scene between Joaquin Phoenix and Philip Seymour Hoffman in The Master, where they're kind of like testing each other, one of the best scenes ever done. So Jordan Alford's in there. DDL was amazing. Lincoln. I can't get past like the kitsch of Spielberg sometimes.
Mhm.
And that movie to me, like at the beginning when they're like, I'm gonna recite the Gettysburg Address to you, I was like, oh, I'm going to go get popcorn because I can't handle this. So again, I think they're very comparative, but Joaquin, Hugh Jackman, these are people who just I don't think really got any credit. I mean, when those Oscars went off, Daniel Day-Lewis was like a 1-25 favorite. Not a 25-1, a 1-25. If you bet $25, you want $1. Like that's the type of favorite he was, and I think that's crazy in the type of year that this was. All of that being said, Anne Hathaway absolutely killed it. I love that for some reason we were getting on we were getting in the baby steps of like cancel culture, and I hate things to hate things. So it was like Anne Hathaway was barely in the movie. She shouldn't have won. And I'm like, all right. But every time I watch that scene and I'll randomly YouTube it, I cry every single time. So
yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. But
if that's not what an actor's performance is supposed to do, I don't know what it is.
I agree. I mean, that is almost one take. It's really ridiculous when she's really having the breakdown and doing the deep breaths and stuff. It's unbelievable. Any last thoughts before we jump over to the Descendants? And no, not the Disney Descendants, the George Clooney Descendants. I could not put the Disney Descendants. No offense to Disney fans. I love Disney, but no.
My last thought is if anyone feels like they need an introduction to musicals, Les Mis is a great place to start because it does still have that heavy film atmosphere to it. Whereas if you start with some of the more comedy-driven musicals, it kind of can drive you away a little bit. Start with Les Mis. Really pay attention to these characters and how these characters relate to one another, because that's the most important part of this entire show.
Yeah, I agree. Great movie. Really liked it. Jordan Alford says, ew. I don't know what he's saying ew to, but Jordan, I apologize for whatever I said. Let's on to the 2011 Alexander Payne movie, not Disney. Alexander Payne movie, my number 100, The Descendants. I'm a big Alexander Payne fan. This is the only one of his movies that made my top 100. But when I tell you I was cutting Alexander Payne movies when I was at like 105 movies, I mean Nebraska and Sideways were two of my last cuts here. Those are two movies that I really, really love. Nebraska just, I think, nails that whole like small town, got nothing to live for kind of thing. Sideways, great midlife crisis movie. But ultimately, I go with The Descendants. And this movie had a massive impact on me. I think I was just finishing up my sophomore year of film school, or getting into my sophomore year of film school. Was like halfway through, was really starting to get into the whole writing thing and all of that. And I saw this movie and I was like, man, you can make a movie about anything. I mean, we just talked for a half hour about Les Mis, and this is the complete opposite of Les Mis, and yet it's still a great movie, and that's what I think works. That's why I love movies, because you can have these grand epics, and then you can have Wild Strawberries, So it's like, I just love what happens in this movie. I love Clooney's performance. Shailene Woodley stole my heart. I was like, where is she? Why does she not go to film school at the University of Miami? Why is she not here? But I love how it's just such a small movie, ultimately about nothing. Like I remember I saw this movie once when I was in college, and then I went home for winter break and I watched it again with my parents in the theater. And then I ended up seeing it 2 more times in theaters. But when I went and watched it with my parents in theaters, both my parents loved it. And then afterwards, my mom said, that movie makes you wonder, why did they ever make that movie? And I think that's what's so great about it, is that you do wonder, like, why did we need to watch a movie about a rich guy who's got so many rich guy problems? He's got all these problems, whose wife is in a coma and he's got to deal with his daughters. Why do we need to watch this movie? And to me, going to school down in Miami at the time, and like on the University of Miami campus, everybody was like, oh, you must, like, they think you're on vacation all the time. And granted, college for the most part is a vacation for a lot of people. But just because you're in one of these vacation destinations does not mean that everything just disappears. It doesn't just happen. And so I just think that whole message and just the way that this was made, I love it. But John, this was the first time you watched it. What do you got?
Again, I think George Clooney nails it in this movie. I love small ensemble movies, and we're going to see that throughout my list. We're going to see movies that have like 2 or 3 people in them the further down we get. And I love that because it gets so much personal that way. And when George Clooney has that opening monologue where he's just talking about how, and he's just dispelling the myth of Hawaii, it's so beautiful. And despite the fact that he's this millionaire with millionaire problems, the entire story is built around this basic premise of how does he relate to his daughters while his wife is dying. It's so beautiful because it's so close and it's so relatable. And that's the beauty of this movie, that despite the fact that we have this character who we shouldn't be able to relate with at all, we're all able to relate with him because it's so human.
What I think is fascinating about it is they almost take somebody in the family dies and you have a big family. There's all the stuff that goes on with the funeral and how do we handle that and like who has to take over the actual I can't even think of the word. It's bad. I worked at a funeral home and I can't even think of the word. But actually going through the process, getting the arrangements. That's the word. I couldn't think of the word arrangements, but going through the arrangements and everything like that. And what I think is so amazing about this movie is it takes the idea of arranging a funeral and instead makes it about arranging your entire future with all those distant people who come into your life that you don't, if somebody dies, you start seeing people that you haven't seen in years. It's like, what is it? The Italians only see each other at weddings and funerals. That's it. Yeah. That's the only time. And that's kind of what this movie is. But instead of it being about the funeral and all the friends, it's about this guy has to make the arrangements for this massive sale that's going to impact all these people he could give zero shits about. And I think it's just so fascinating because at the end of the day, this could have been about an ice cream scooper who he's got to go to work and he's trying to take over the ice cream business, or he's just trying to get a promotion. And now his girlfriend goes into a coma. And now how is he going to deal with that? And maybe they have a kid. Like, it could have been about anybody. And that's what I love about Alexander Payne movies is you never feel like the people are out of your realm. Even when they're rich, spoiled brats, or they have all this money. George Clooney doesn't do a single grandiose thing in this entire movie, and that's spelled out right at the beginning. Give your kids enough money to have something, but never enough money to do nothing. And I think there's nothing massive in this, despite the fact that we are watching maybe one of the richest people we've ever watched in a movie. And you never know it because he runs around in flip-flops and cargo shorts and button-down shirts, and it's him in his pool that's disgusting looking.
Yeah, exactly. And like that's just what Alexander Payne does so well in this movie is he just brings it in to that intimate aspect of it where it's just like you're just feeling George Clooney the entire time. Because George Clooney is making you feel like is real. Like this is someone that you can just have a conversation with on the street because he's like your next door neighbor, despite the fact that he's never going to be my next door neighbor. I know that for sure, but he just feels that way. And the movie does a very good way of establishing that with that first interaction with the youngest daughter and that phone call about, hey, come apologize to my daughter. And it's just right there. It's just like, yeah, Clooney is a little dissociated from his family, but he's still a grounded character that he knows that this still has to be done.
And I love it. Like he shows up at the house, say you're sorry. The girl's okay with it. She doesn't mean it. She doesn't mean it at all. And Clooney's like, do you mean it? Yeah. Okay. Good enough for me. Like, it's just like, it's the parental thing that doesn't matter to him. And we see that in the fact that, his daughter, Alexandra, is off, at some boarding school, I presume, or something. I mean, they never really say exactly what it is, but I presume it's a boarding school. And she's off there, like drinking and partying and doing whatever, still getting into trouble. And, you got the Scotty who's running around flipping everybody off. And, she's flipping off Troy, poor Troy, who really doesn't do anything wrong in this movie except for crash the thing that the wife wanted to be on anyway. Like really like the nicest guy, it seems like, just bad timing. But all these little moments, they just add up to so much. And you never lose the possibility that this could happen to you. Am I ever going to make a multi-million-dollar land sale? No, I'm not. But there's going to be some time in my life and in everybody's life where we are so overwhelmed with every single thing that's happening and we get the biggest inconvenience we can possibly get. And I just think that Alexander Payne does such a great job of capturing that, and so does George Clooney. And I really think that even Shailene Woodley completely captures just the idea of like you're going through this and you have this conflict of knowing your mother is not a good person and is cheating on your father and doing all of this stuff, but also knowing that you're never going to see your mom again. And it's this constant battle, this like tug of war. I think it's just captured so perfectly. And then you have Robert Forster, who comes in and is just one of the meanest, most obnoxious people in this movie. And George Clooney can't do anything about it. And Alexandra can't do anything about it, because if they do anything about it, they come across as the bad people, because this is his daughter laying in the bed the entire time.
Yeah, exactly. And Robert Forster, once again, brings an incredible performance. As he
Robert Forster. Love Robert Forster.
So underrated. I just love, I'm going to hit you now, followed by that smack. And because it was delivered so well. It was just, I'm going to hit you now. And it's like just that 1 second beat for it to register with you that that's what's said. And then the punch. And it's so beautiful.
Now, I want to know, so when I was doing my MFA, we actually watched The Descendants. We read the book and watched The Descendants for an adaptation class. So I have read the book. Really good book. Really fun read. Like, really good. What do you think about Sid in this movie?
I actually really enjoy Sid because I think he's a very important character for George Clooney's character to realize exactly what he's feeling. That scene in the hotel room where he's just up at night and he's just having that one-on-one talk with Sid is one of the most real scenes in the entire movie. And he's so important for that. And I don't think that scene works as well if you don't get "sup, dude" as your introduction to the character.
Exactly. And so the character in the book is much, much different. And so in the adaptation class, there was a big argument about does the Sid character translate to screen? And most people said no. And I was like, no, Sid's amazing. Because the whole thing with Sid is he's a tool the entire time. Sup, bro, hug him, never do that to me again. He's so mean to Robert Forster's wife, who Alice, I guess her name is, so mean to Alice, who's dealing with dementia of some sort. He doesn't get it. He just can't take anything seriously. He gets cold cocked, as he says. Yeah. And then he makes the R word joke, which one of the few times that something like this lands. Don't go watch Garden State. It doesn't land quite as good there as it does in this, but it totally lands because it makes sense. You feel like you're getting a human moment from Sid, and then he does psych. I don't have a brother, whatever. And like, they all hate him. And it's like, do you get hit in the face a lot? And then when that hotel scene happens, and it's Clooney's way of really being able to see Matt King's way. I got to start calling him Matt King, really get into it. But it's Matt King's way of seeing that it's not all about the surface here. You know, all these big things, you don't know what's really going on. And it's like how nobody really understands what's going on with him. Everybody knows, oh, I heard you're going to make that land deal. He gets it from the daughter's friend's mom. He gets it from Judy Greer when she eventually comes into the movie, who doesn't even know. He's getting it from all the cousins. He's getting it from all these people, all the friends, everybody, but they don't really know what he's dealing with. And it's that whole, what do you externalize and what do you internalize? And I think Sid just nails that in that moment when it's that realization of like, all right, Sid, you know what? You're really not that bad. I got to just give you a chance and realize that like you're struggling just like everybody else is struggling. And even though you just seem like a dumb surfer bro, he's the captain of the chess team. You might not know that.
Yeah.
He's captain of the chess team. Like it works so well. I love every single character in this movie, and we'll talk about some of them in a little bit more, but go ahead. What were you going to say there?
No, that's exactly what I was going to say, is that I'm just really interested. Like, how is Sid in the book? How is he different?
He's a little bit more reserved. He doesn't come across as if I remember correctly, and it has been like almost 2 years now, and it was like a rushed reading, but he's a little bit more reserved. He doesn't do as much. Don't get the scene about the dad or anything like that, or that comes out like right away, and George Clooney knew that the whole time. It's something along those lines, but it's a very different turn of events here. So I think that this version is much better because I do think that he's kind of running alongside Clooney, where Clooney doesn't understand his daughters, and he doesn't understand the Sid guy. And then he's got to dig deeper on all of them. And by the end of the movie, he understands them all. And Jordan Alford says it in here, Matt King would win Survivor at the end of this movie. That's how much he's developed throughout. I think that's 100% true. Like, he really does go from this guy who is all surface level type stuff to, all right, I got to start digging deeper. I got to start looking in. And that really all begins when Alexandra drops the knowledge that mom was cheating on you. One of the best line deliveries of all time, and Clooney's reaction where he's just sitting there and he's just, what? Like, that reaction is so pure.
Yeah.
And it's so subdued and it's just so perfect. And that's really when it really hits him. Like, I gotta start like being present. I'm too caught up in everything else and I'm not here.
Yeah, no, exactly. And the fact that that's this driving plot point in this movie too, because it kind of takes us it gives us the arc for us to ride on for the rest of the development of these characters and gives us something other than this land deal. Mm-hmm. But then it all wraps around that land deal again in the end when you find out who his wife is cheating on him is someone who's going to extremely benefit from this land deal.
Mm-hmm. And it worked, but it all works.
Absolutely.
It all works. And by the end of it, now he's not worried about pleasing the brothers. He's not worried about, he's doing what's best for him and what's best for the family. And he'll deal with it when he has to deal with it. Mm-hmm. He can't deal with everything right now. He's got to just worry about it later. And whatever it is was so amazing. And I know people now, it's 10 years after this movie was made. But when Matthew Lillard came back on the screen, this is the first time people had seen Matthew Lillard in a very, very long time. He had disappeared for a while after his 90s fame and then his Scooby-Doo run. And he come, in little things here and there, but to really get back into the spotlight, it was amazing to see that it was Matthew Lillard playing the role of Brian Spear, who is just, I love it. I think it works so well here with Brian Spear. But yeah, I mean, he's going to benefit, and now he's got it. How is he going to tell the cousins that? He doesn't have to. The same way he doesn't have to tell, the Elizabeth's father that, you know what, your girl wasn't that great. She was actually awful, and these are all the bad things she's done. He doesn't have to do that. He doesn't have to explain himself to anybody. He's just got to do what is best for him, what is best for his family, and it's a big jump from where he starts at the beginning of the movie, which is paradise can go fuck itself. That's really where it starts. So,
Yeah, and that's one of the most compelling things about Matt King as a character is watching him be put into all of these situations where he can just blow up everyone's world. And he just says, there's no point. I don't have to. Because he's looking so much more at his inward growth and how he can grow in order to make his family stronger in the face of all this adversity that they're facing.
Yeah, and the only time he really blows up anything is when he kisses Judy Greer. That's really the only time he really blows up anything, when he kisses her on the way out. And then he could have made it so much worse, but that's really the only time he takes any chance. And then at the very end, when she comes into the hospital, and he says, "Oh, that's enough. All right, get out." Like that's enough. So good.
Absolutely. When he kissed Judy Greer, it was just like, I didn't think it would be coming, and then to see it happen, it's like, oh yeah, this is the perfect thing to do here. Because it's just enough for her to get like, well, what was that all about? Mm-hmm. And to then start realizing that that Brian was off for the rest of the night and lead us to that final scene.
Yeah, and he didn't have to say a word. He didn't have to blow up Brian. Brian Spear was going to do it to himself. So let it play out that way. And, I think that's a lot of this movie is people kind of damaging themselves. You see it with all the, he talks about all the cousins. They all have millions of dollars and they all blew it all. And now they have no money. You have Shailene Woodley, who is drinking nonstop and she's doing drugs and she's going there. You have, Matt King, who's just so caught up in his work. He doesn't even take time to notice that his wife is around doing whatever she's doing. The wife herself, who's going on all these dangerous type adventure things. It really is about like the destruction of yourself and being in control of the falling apart and coming to terms with that control, which for our three main characters by the end of this movie, Scotty, Alexandra and Matt King, all three of them have kind of come to terms with Scotty losing her mother and how it's going to be okay, or you just got to move on, and Matt King, how now he's the parent, let's go, let's do this, and Alexandra realizing like, what, I got to kind of put this behind me because there's bigger things going on. One of my favorite last shots in movie history. It just is poetic the way that the movie ends with the three of them just sitting on the couch sharing ice cream watching March of the Penguins, because it's just poetic.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic way to end the movie. It's the perfect way to end this movie because it just such a small act, and it shows how far all of these characters have come. Mm-hmm. It's incredible. It's incredible. It's simplistic, and that's what makes it so good.
Yeah, and I think what I like about the Descendants, what ultimately made me put this on there over Nebraska, over Sideways, over some of Alexander Payne's other movies, about Schmidt was never in the running.
Mhm.
Oh, that movie bothers me. But the other two, like what puts this one there is this movie doesn't need one of those big gotcha shock moments.
Mhm.
Sideways has the Thomas Hayden Church scene, which where he's crawling in or he's coming into the room and the woman with the husband. It's very graphic. It's very disturbing. But not to I don't want to spoil anything. But then Nebraska it has like those bigger moments of
Mhm.
like why is this happening. The Descendant stays very level throughout. It never jumps to that larger than life. Election's another one, Alexander Payne, where he's got Tracy Flick doing all this horrible stuff that's just over the top enough. The Descendants doesn't feel like it ever goes over the top. It feels like, yeah, these are rational decisions that everybody would make. And again, like I could find myself in that situation. Like I really could. There's no plot devices planted. There's no, oh, I forgot my wallet, or oh, I forgot my watch, or oh, we got to go. Like it just happens. It's just
Mhm.
everything just happens because it happens. And I think that's what works so well. And what do you think? What do you think? Obviously, the opening monologue you've mentioned, but what do you think about how much voiceover is in the first 30 minutes of this movie and the fact that it really doesn't come back again for the rest of the movie?
I didn't notice it at all, in all honesty. But what I did notice was the scene when we're first introduced to the cousins and the idea of this land sale, and they're in his office and they're all at the table, and then it just gets absolutely silent,
Mm-hmm.
to be broken by him just saying, "Alex is gonna be fine,"
Yeah.
or "Liz is gonna be fine,"
Elizabeth's going to be fine. She'll
right?
get through
And
this. Yeah.
like that voiceover there, it was just like so impactful because it's like it really does tell us about everything in this movie
Mhm.
because it's so hectic. Everything around him is hectic. There's so much going on around him, and then it's just this one moment of complete silence followed by, "This is the only thing that matters right now."
What I love about this, so, you go through film school, anything like that. Really, Robert McKee did this when
Mhm.
he wrote Story, but voiceover is bad. Voiceover is lazy writing. Voiceover doesn't work. And then that has now been adopted by every film student ever, where they're like, oh, if they use voiceover, they're just bad. And I hate this movie because there's voiceover. Right? Sometimes it's very lazy. Sometimes it doesn't work at all. Sometimes it is Alec Baldwin in the Royal Tenenbaums, and you're like, oh, okay. But what I think works so well with this is in the first 30 minutes, I would bet that there's probably about 6 full minutes, and I'm saying full minutes of speaking, where
Mhm.
George Clooney is speaking in voiceover. It is relentless. There is so much of it, and it disappears. Why does it disappear? Because he's not alone anymore.
Because
Because
he's
now his family is around him. And I think it's a great way of showing the internal struggle of George Clooney early on. He doesn't trust anybody enough to say these things to. He's saying it to himself, which is coming out to us, but he's just saying it out loud. And yes, it's exposition heavy. And yes, it is over the top. And yes, maybe there's a few too many details in there about the land deal that we didn't need to know. But ultimately, this is what's going through his mind. This is what he's dealing with. It's as if he was explaining it to everybody who's asked him, what decision are you going to make about the land deal? Oh, big decision. What are you going to do? All of this is going through his mind. And then as the movie goes, he's with people and he's
Mhm.
starting to become more of a parent and more of a family member. And it really, really works, I think. And I think it's a great use of voiceover that internalizes the struggle.
I absolutely agree. And it's also coupled with the way that Payne decided to use weather, I feel,
Mhm.
because there are some very distinct changes in the lighting in certain scenes where at first everything's really bright. It's
Mhm.
Hawaii. It's this paradise thing. And as we keep going, then we get to the point where we have the scene where he's running along and he sees Brian,
Mhm.
and it's a dark and gloomy day.
Mhm.
It's like this is the day where everything's kind of coming to it, right? This is what we've been leading up to in the movie, is this confrontation between these two, to see how that goes. And then the next scene is like the land deal, or the next
Yep.
time we see the weather change is the land deal, and it's windy. It's like the winds of change are coming in, blowing away this cloud that was over Matt, and just letting it open up again to see what he actually has.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I really I mean I think that's a great recognition there, because yeah, where he's like almost seeing him, he's seen him through the fog and all of that. Like I think it's just so well done. I really love it. Now, AFI does their top 100 movie quotes a couple years ago. It came out before The Descendants. So number one there was Frankly, My Dear, I Don't Give a Damn. Would You Were Putting Lipstick on a Corpse take over the number one spot as the greatest line in movie history?
It's a great line. And just like the emotional impact of that type of thing being like, what don't you understand? This is pointless.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it hits you like a ton of bricks.
Mm-hmm.
It's fantastic. It's a fantastic.
I love that line. So every time it happens, I die because it's one of the funny. He breaks at that point. He hasn't broken until that point, and he's like, "You were putting lipstick on a corpse. Like, you won't tell me who my wife was cheating on me with. Well, guess what? She's gonna die." And it just keeps going. And I love the reaction of the husband where he just goes, "Hey, man, that's a little intense." Like, that's such an Alexander Payne reaction. That's what his movies are littered with, which is people like reacting in a very like da 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 kind of way when it's like a very heavy moment. I love that, which probably leads to why Alexander Payne, Jim Rash, and Nat Faxon won the Oscar for adapted screenplay for this movie, which was more than well deserved. It was the only Oscar the movie won, but if it was going to win one, I'm glad it was that because it definitely deserved that one for lines such as that. But no, I just think it's one of those movies that gets overlooked because I think people they look past it and ultimately would be like, it's kind of boring. Nothing happens. So much happens in this movie, but nothing happens with a gun or with the only punch I think thrown is Robert Forster. You want George Clooney to punch Matthew Lillard the entire movie, and Matthew Lillard, Jordan Alford says he's so punchable in this movie. Yeah, he is so punchable in this movie, but the punch never happens. And that's like what you almost want that to happen. And I think the growth is so much better. And sometimes it's more entertaining to watch subdued performances than in your face, over the top, action type thing. So
absolutely. And that's why we're going to have so many more films that exhibit this throughout this list.
Yeah, absolutely. Now going over to the Oscars before we hop out of here for our first one. Mm-hmm. What is your take on The Artist, which did end up being the Descendants Ford picture?
I've never seen it. I haven't watched it yet.
You haven't watched it yet. Okay, that's fine. I won't say anything then. I will say I like that movie a hell of a lot more than other people do. I don't think this was the best picture of the year. Shame, which we will be getting to shortly, I do believe was the best picture of the year. I forget. I think also, or no, Tree of Life, right? Wasn't Tree of Life? Anyway, there's so many movies from this year that I really love. 2011 is a year that I really, really have a lot of movies that are on this list that I think we'll be talking about a lot. But if Fassbender wasn't going to get a nomination, then yes, George Clooney should have won the damn Oscar. So that's just how I feel about that. Shailene Woodley, a bummer she didn't get nominated. She was in there for the Globes. I love her. I still think she was great. Berenice Bejo and Octavia Spencer. You can't really argue with either of them for The Help or for The Artist, but she was great. And that's really it. Payne lost to Michelle Hazanavicius. I really don't know how to say his last name because I don't think he's actually ended up making another movie since, at least not one of note. So, but I love this. It's a little tiny masterpiece. And I think that, as time goes on and we get further and further removed from it, unfortunately, I think Alexander Payne's style kind of goes out. Alexander Payne's not Wes Anderson. And I think like he was Wes Anderson before Wes Anderson, and then Wes Anderson kind of took over. And now Alexander Payne is kind of like, he's a little forgotten. He doesn't have as big of a fan base. He doesn't have that cult following, but I hope his movies don't ever completely fall off because I never saw Downsizing because I heard it was a disaster, but pretty much everything else he's done he just nails those little human moments. And I think this is his finest of the fine, which is quite something for sure. So that's our number 100. I almost said that's our top 100. That is not our top 100. That is our number 100 for both John and I. Les Miserables for John, The Descendants, not the Disney one. In case you still think it's the Disney one, and we just talked about all of that, I doubt that they're going to have a woman in a coma and a man finding out that his wife cheated on him all in the same movie. Also a lot of flipping off and a lot of mean things like that. I got The Descendants. Interesting one coming up again next week, John. Did I jump over anything that you wanted to end with, or should I talk about what's coming next week?
No, go right ahead.
All right, so next week, we're going to be coming back to you. We'll figure out the time and the place and all that fun stuff. Hopefully, we can just continue to keep doing Tuesdays and keep it a little consistent here. But we will be coming at you next week with John's number 99 and my number 99. His number 99 is Toy Story. You all might have heard of it. 1995. My number 99 is once again about as opposite of that as you can possibly be. I have The Wrestler, the Darren Aronofsky movie with Mickey Rourke, who I don't think would be allowed anywhere within 100 maybe miles of Disney or Pixar. So yes, The Wrestler, Mickey Rourke's comeback. That's what we're going to be talking about next week. Two very different movies yet again. If you're following along, make sure to watch both of those movies. And if you don't want to watch them and you just want to see if it's something you'd be interested in, just remember we're going to have a lot of spoilers. And not that Toy Story or The Wrestler really have much to spoil. They are like a character study and a movie that if you haven't seen it, get out from under your rock. But make sure to watch them, rewatch them. It's always fun to revisit some of these movies that you haven't seen in a long, long time. So got a lot of fun, interesting episodes coming up, but that's going to be our next one, Toy Story and The Wrestler. John, thanks so much for joining again. Follow over on Twitter at Survivor Specialist. Yes, this is a movie show, but it is on the Survivor Specialist channel. We are still surviving without Survivor, and we're going to continue surviving without Survivor, and we will continue to survive when Survivor eventually does come back. So much fun tonight, John. We will see everybody next week.